Welcome to this week's episode of the GESTALTEN podcast, presented to you by Konzepthaus Digital, your number one source for headhunting and contracting solutions within UI and UX. My name is Martin Groschwald, and today's guest on the GESTALTEN podcast is Sue Neuhauser, the former MAN, Tesla, and Faraday Future color and trim chief. And Sue and I had a lovely conversation about the importance of color and trim, the importance of color and trim in a brand itself, how it is integrated in a design studio, and of course, the future of color and trim and how well it's going to help to shape a company and, a brand in this future coming. So enjoy the conversation I had with Sue and leave us a good message if you enjoy the conversation. And here we go. Hello and welcome to the show, Sue. It's a pleasure to have you on board. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me today.
So this is going to be a conversation about a topic that I've wanted to do for a very long time, and I'm very happy that I'm doing this with you because not only do you have experience in Germany, in the US with, CMF brand and everything that's connected to it, but also you are somebody who has seen the OEM world, you have seen the startup world. So it's going to give us a very, very good example on, what the state of CMF design is nowadays and what, where we're going to develop everything towards to. So I'm very excited about this. And so we want to talk about color, material, trim, finish. There's a couple of words, I think, and a couple of expressions on how to understand color and trim, color, material, finish nowadays. But they both have something in common, which is they're massively underrated when it comes to the general kind of design process. So everybody's always talking about the idea of, exterior design, interior design, recently, of course, about the digital processes, UI and UX, but nobody really talks about CMF, even though it's one of the most important parts of the car design industry. So in your own words, why do you think that is? Why do you think such an important thing is almost being disregarded by so many people?
I think I have to paddle back a little bit. I think color, material, and finish is still in the OEM world and a little bit in the startup world seen as a side project, rather an afterthought, rather than one of the main key design elements. Sometimes it's not even understood that it's a vehicle design. It's like it's just a little bit of a product that needs to be added in the end. CMF is of great importance, I think, because it's the first engagement with the customer and the vehicle and the product itself. CMF is being perceived with all your senses. You can see it, you can feel it, you can sometimes smell it, the materials, and it basically gives the heart and soul and flavor to a product, to a surface. What happens with interior and exterior, it's the main architecture of a product, and with CMF you're giving, like I said, the soul to the vehicle and the flavor and the spirit, and depending on how you develop it, it can attract many different clienteles or customer profiles, and I think that's why it's so important. It can enhance a product, but it can also destroy a product if it's not done the right way. There's a lot of cost and thought process involved in the whole thing, and it's overall, I think, greatly misunderstood and not understood in the car design industry. It should be seen as one of the third pillars of vehicle design. It should be exterior, interior, and CMF running parallel. And due to the long design and development processes within CMF, it needs to be almost started before you start any architecture design. It should be ahead of anything else, be the outlook and the forecast of any product, and then start developing a surface around it.
So obviously, I mean, what you have just mentioned, I completely agree. And obviously, we could take this list a little bit further. I think the car design industry now stands on almost like five pillars. It's not just interior and exterior, but it's color and trim,
It's user interface as well.
user interface as well. And there's one important part for me as well, which is the operation. So what happens in the background,
Yeah.
which is the stuff that is the visualization, the 3D modeling, the clay modeling. It's not just that this runs on exterior. This is its own department. So
Hmm.
when we look at this, and obviously this operations department is something relatively new that has emerged over the past few years, but of course UI has been on such a rise because of technology and the people think it's just so important. If you look back in color and trim, and if you see, especially like going back into like the 50s or even 40s, um, that the color was such an important factor to selling the car as well. Let's think back to the Ferraris that were red for the racing, for example. I mean, even funnily taking back the color of the silver arrows with Mercedes, and then having that as a functional point, of course. And that's just about it, exterior. Why do you think that a lot of the people, and this is obviously really weird, is it has never really been accepted as one of these most important factors? It's because it's not that simple as just, oh, here's a color, let's put it on a car, as you just mentioned. But it seems to me that a lot of the guys, and if you go into a design school, for example, you go into the art center, Pforzheim or whatever, they teach exterior, they teach interior. Some of them are now starting with UI UX, but they are completely leaving the color and trim out of it almost. The only one that I can think of is Reutlingen, that have a very specialized course for it. But it's almost just like like, well, yeah, we can do it in the last instance. And it's just a weird concept for me. I just don't get it. Like, like, where do you think this is coming from?
To be honest, I don't know. I have no idea why they haven't understood that if you, for example, design a surface and an architecture, and then in the end you think like, oh, what we're gonna do with this architecture, and then the CMF designer comes and, hey, I've found these amazing finishes and this amazing company, and I would like to develop this further. I think we can go very far with this. I have a color changing pigment you can program, and later on maybe create an app and save all the paint process. If you get into that, but it would require you can only do certain surface width or thicknesses or different curvatures or angles in order to apply that. So your whole process of the design, of the architecture design, has to be then redone. So not only are companies saving wasting time on that, making this an after process, they're also wasting money. A couple examples is like you have a certain thickness for material, and that's kind of the material you developed or you would propose for a certain area because it's cost effective, it's amazing, you have your own design, it meets all the specifications and regulations, but the architecture that's designed, it doesn't fit there, and maybe it's already in tooling before CMF got engaged. So not only do you have to spend more time to redo the design, the architecture, you also have to retool things. And because the process of CMF, and we can maybe talk about this later, the process of CMF is one of the longest design processes itself, from the concept to the production development phase. It goes, it takes more time to design and develop and meet all the specifications later on than just the architecture itself. And that's where a lot of industries and a lot of companies have to do certain additional loops in there then in order to actually get them the final desired finish or color onto the product because it's an afterthought. So if you would in the end don't make this an afterthought, make, for example, workshops where you like sit the team together, make a combined brief of what are we making, what's this product? What's the flavor? What's the soul of this product? What's the customer? What do we need to be competitive in the next 5 to 10 years? Where are the trends going? Make this a team effort, and then everyone goes out and makes initial proposals, but integrate CMF holistically within the team structure and not making it an afterthought. You would have a much more holistic and ripened product earlier on without losing time and cost. And personally, I don't understand why this hasn't been done yet, or it has been done partially with startups I worked in, and I try to integrate the CMF designers, basically sitting all together on each other's laps of the interior and exterior designer and making this a consolidated team effort rather than sliding finished sketches under someone's door and said, hey, put something on there. It's not the smart way to do. And you will see that having an interior and exterior designer and a CMF designer working that closely together and being equally responsible for the architecture, but also the finish and the color and everything, you'll be saving time and also developing a much more interesting product. You come up with a very different architecture and very different surfaces because you're getting early enough input on CMF, and you're feeding the architecture designers, so to say, with finds and innovations and ideas they wouldn't think of themselves, and then you inspire them to actually go way beyond their normal thinking process of an architecture. Said, hey, we could do this if we do this finish, or we could work with this material, but these are the restrictions of this material. But if we do this on the outside, we would have much better aerodynamics, or we could have an indication of pollution on the outside, which could be then later on a unique selling point of this product or an indicator. And you could spark further ideas. It would be a much more holistic brainstorm process in the early phase of developing a concept, and then going further on into bringing this to life. Do you know what I mean? It's still like the afterthought of a CMF rather than an early on integration within the initial concept phase. And the question of you, like, why would that be, and why was color or material and finish a much more valued process or product or development stage, maybe in the 50s, 60s? I think color, material, finish evoke an experience, a much stronger experience than just the surface itself, I think. And the colors had of certain vehicles, such as a Ferrari, for example, or an Aston Martin, like this, the greens, had a much more importance to the brand itself. So the brand and the product were more tied together through materials and finishes. Does it make sense?
It makes a lot of sense.